and admit everyone else at the same time. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thank you for
Morning.
good morning. Thank you for attending Eclectics. And at this time, I'd ask you to turn your cameras off and your microphones to um, better our experience with the lecture. So today I have the pleasure of introducing Dave Plouffe, who earned a Bachelor in Arts degree in art history from the University of Laverne and completed his master's here at Cal State Fullerton. Since graduating, Dave has been a faculty member at Cal State Fullerton, University of Laverne, the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising, Chaffey College, and Santiago Canyon College. For the past 12 years, Dave has taught a variety of courses, including Introduction to Art, Survey 1 and 2, The History of Modern Art, Mathematics and Modernism, and Contemporary Art. He has lectured on topics ranging from prehistoric cave art to abstract expressionism and minimalism, but his research interests are found in today's topic: art theft, looting, and repatriation. Prior to teaching, Dave worked as a collections administrator for the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, Department of Costume and Textiles. When not teaching and grading, Dave is an avid gardener, philatelist, and book collector. So now I'd like to turn the floor over to Dave Plouffe.
Thank you very much for having me today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started on the presentation. All right, so hopefully you can see that. I always give my students a disclaimer when I begin that I do not partake in art theft and I do not recommend you do either. This is also about the 1-year anniversary of one of the more daring art heists. And last March 30th, in fact, it's Van Gogh's birthday, a thief basically ran his car through the front doors of the Singer Laren Museum in Amsterdam. And he got out and he took this one painting, and there's some repairs being done to the door there. But he took this painting here, the Parsonage Garden at Noonan, and it is still missing. It has not been recovered. And this is very unique with Van Gogh. He tends to be a very popular artist with art thieves. Since 1988, 28 artworks of his have been stolen, and all 28 have been recovered. This is the 29th to be stolen, and we're still out looking for it. Van Gogh, the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam is also one of the sites for an art theft. Back in 2002, thieves broke into the museum by roof access. They had a ladder and placed it up against the building at the right and broke in through the skylight. They stole a couple of paintings. The first one at the left here is the congregation leaving the Reformed Church at Noonan, and you can see the actual church in the image at the right. And I was actually okay that they took this painting. I'm not necessarily a big fan of this work. But those thieves also stole this one here, which is one of my favorites. This is called The View of the Sea at Scheveningen. And what's wonderful about this work by Van Gogh is that he paints with this impasto technique, which is very thick paint. And you can see from the view or the subject matter here, we've got a storm coming in off of the ocean. You can imagine the wind being kicked up. And what happened when this painting was x-rayed in 1990 was that they found sand particles had embedded themselves into the paint from the wind that day. And I just thought that was so cool to have kind of like a time capsule of the actual moment that Van Gogh is painting on this seashore. As I mentioned, the paintings have been recovered. These were gone for a very long time. They had actually caught the thieves They're still in jail to this day, but they couldn't find where the paintings were. But about 4 years ago, they did recover them. And here they are being returned to the Van Gogh Museum. So I always, ask kind of a deeper question. Actually, where does art truly belong? And it's one of those things when you're going through a museum, have you ever stopped to wonder why the bust of Nefertiti is in a museum in Germany rather than in Egypt, being one of the most important Egyptian artifacts? Or when we're walking through the British Museum and we see the Elgin marbles, well, shouldn't they be in Greece? Does art belong to its country of origin? But we may have a country that is undergoing extreme political turmoil, like we see in Syria. It might be subject to environmental conditions, such as pollution. There's a time where you're going to have cultures that do not exist any longer, and this is particularly relevant to artwork that we find from antiquity. But we also have to be aware of the country of origin may damage or destroy the artwork. And recently we've seen the impact of ISIS in the Middle East, in this case, destroying this Lamassu sculpture from basically the Temple of Sargon II. And there's only 3 locations in the world where these 12-foot high sculptures exist in their original location. And now we know that one of them no longer does. Does art belong in museums? Because in museums, they can be exhibited, preserved, protected, and accessible to the public. When you look at the crowds, at least prior to our pandemic, at the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, or at the LA County Museum of Art locally, the Louvre, all these people packed around to see the Mona Lisa. And even at the British Museum. How do artworks arrive at their particular locations? And for instance, when we look at the Rosetta Stone was found by Napoleon way back in the late 1700s. In fact, on July 15th, 1799, it is uncovered in the city of Rosetta, Egypt, which is up in the Nile Delta region. And when Napoleon was on his campaigns throughout Egypt, he definitely had a tremendous amount of soldiers. There were close to 40,000 soldiers that were under his command. But he also had nearly 200 individuals who he called or labeled as intellectuals. And these people were painters, engineers, botanists, mathematicians, and historians. So the Rosetta Stone is uncovered. A couple years later, though, Napoleon is defeated both by the British Empire and the Ottoman Empire. And according to the Treaty of Alexandria, this Rosetta Stone ends up becoming owned by the British. And so we have to go to the British Museum to see this work today. But art theft and looting, that's not anything new. When we look back to the Great Pyramids, these were looted millennia ago. The obelisk at St. Peter's was taken from Egypt. It's always one of those artworks that I had to question, like, why is this Egyptian obelisk right here in the Vatican? Well, it was taken from Egypt by the Roman Emperor Caligula back in like 37 AD. It was placed particularly here by one of the popes, Pope Sixtus V, in 1586. When we look at these wonderful horses from the Basilica of San Marco in Venice, if we were to repatriate these artworks, where do we take them? Because they were brought here from a crusade in like 1204, that's the Fourth Crusade, and it was taken from the city of Constantinople. However, they took it from this Arch of Trajan, which you see at the right. So why has stealing or looting art become so popular? And of course, we definitely have had movies in the past that have romanticized this topic, such as the Thomas Crown Affair. But I think most of us can definitely say it's the money aspect because artwork is worth a lot of money. Just a couple of years ago, I think it was October of 2018, this artwork becomes the most famous artwork at auction, selling for more than any other artwork ever has in the past. $400 million. And when you add the buyer's premium to that, it jumps up to $450 million. And this is a work that is attributed to Leonardo da Vinci. Stealing artwork is also really easy. And having worked at a museum, I can tell you that museums are just like any other business. They are underfunded, they are undermanaged and protected. And we normally think of museums as maybe like a guard like this, watching every step that you're making and it's going to prevent anyone from stealing anything, when most guards are really more like this. And I've definitely caught more than a handful of guards asleep at the job when I was working at LACMA. We also have the size and shape of artwork to be concerned with because they're very conducive to stealing. No one's going to walk out with a 6-foot marble sculpture, but many times it's really easy to take a painting or to even cut the canvas from the frame, slide it under a jacket or put it into a backpack or knapsack. So, the size and scale of these artworks can definitely make them conducive to stealing. And finally, how many people are actually looking for lost and stolen art? When we look under the enforcement category, it's really cool because the LAPD does have an art theft detail. And when I first started studying art theft back in like 2008, 2009, I called them up and asked them how many people were in this department because I thought it was so fascinating. And the person on the phone said, "You're talking to him." There was only one person. Around 2016, I redid this lecture. And so I decided to update everything. And so I called them back, and the same person answered the phone. And he informed me that they had doubled in size of their department. So the LAPD has 2 people working on their art theft detail. But we do have other entities helping us look for lost and stolen art, including Interpol, the International Police Agency, which is currently working on a list of 25,000 works of art, more than enough that could completely stock a museum. We also have this really wonderful website called the Art Loss Register. It's more of a database that auction houses are required to search before they put any work up for auction. And they currently get about 1 hit for every 10,000 works that are searched for. But they have been important in terms of the repatriation of art to not only individuals, but to also to particular cultures. What surprised me, I think, the most is finding that art theft was the 3rd highest grossing criminal activity behind drugs and weapons. And I figured drugs and weapons would be first and second, but it really surprised me to find out that art theft was 3rd. Other statistics that are even more troubling is that only 10% of stolen art is ever recovered. And I always flip that around to thinking that means 90% of the time you're going to get away with it. And those are pretty good odds. Traffickers receive about 10 cents on the dollar, so about 10% of the art's value. They steal $1 million painting by, let's say, Monet, and they're going to walk away with $100,000. So I've got my presentation divided up into a couple different segments. We're going to consider what happens to art during times of war, And then we're also going to look at some individual art thieves. The Iraq Museum in Baghdad is one of the sites of looting, and it's one of the more current sites. In 2003, during the Gulf War, this museum was looted, and this is a storehouse for artwork of not only antiquity, even more important than that, artwork from the cradle of civilization. There was artwork here that was found nowhere else in the world. They particularly focused on Mesopotamian art. After the museum was looted and even the famous Vorka vase was stolen, there was an amnesty period that the museum allowed individuals to return artworks and without any repercussions. And this artwork was one of those works that was brought back to the museum. However, it was broken into 13 separate pieces, just placed in a cardboard box and left on the doorsteps of the museum. The Vorka vase particularly is important when I teach ancient civilization classes, because this is the first time we have a narrative in art history. This is kind of our first generation away from cave paintings and such. The museum has reopened. It did close down again in 2012. It reopened in 2015 once again. But this is again, just a horrific loss of art. But we have been looting art way back since the Greeks plundered Troy. Among the most famous art thieves is Napoleon. He stole art from during his campaigns in these countries here at the left, from 1796 to 1815. He ravaged not only Europe, but also North Africa, stealing art from Egypt and Austria, Belgium, Germany, Spain, and most importantly for us in our study of art, Italy. This is a person who stole 500 works of art from the Vatican alone, which is why I tell my students, when you die and go to heaven, you're not going to see Napoleon there. He is, a person who stole the Laocoon sculpture, which is, this one is most likely a copy of a Greek original bronze sculpture, but this is Roman in origin. And this is basically what happens in this story. Is Laocoon is a priest. He tries to warn the people of Troy not to bring that wooden horse inside the gates. In fact, he has this famous quote, "What deadly fraud is this?" However, the gods, led by Poseidon, sent out a serpent to prevent Laocoon from doing this. And you have this great sculptural mass of these writhing figures and this serpent. Napoleon was so pleased from this capture that he paraded it down the streets of Paris, along with other treasures from his conquests. And afterwards, he commissioned a set of china to commemorate this event. And if we turn this goblet or vase slightly clockwise, you see that he not only stole the sculpture of Laocoon, but he also stole the Apollo Belvedere, which is another famous, and this is a truly Roman sculpture. Napoleon, though, justified his stealing of art. He said that he wanted to build an appreciation in French society of foreign artists and civilizations. He felt that art could open our eyes to other cultures. However, when you fast forward about 140 years from Napoleon's reign, we have another individual that has the exact opposite feeling, that instead of art opening our eyes to other cultures, it could also close them. When we look at World War II and focus in on the art thefts that Hitler did, they're astounding. This is a person, though, who was very much into art. He attended the opera and theater, musical recitals. He himself was an art student, studying painting, sculpture, and architecture, applying twice to the Arts Academy at Vienna, being turned down for both times. What a different world this would have been had he been accepted to art school. However, also the admissions committee in the Art School of Vienna was comprised entirely of those with Jewish backgrounds, and we feel that this fueled his anti-Semitism. His works, though, are mostly watercolors. They are locked away in the deepest, darkest vaults of museums. They will never see the light of day in our lifetime. Perhaps hundreds of years from now, when our collective memory of World War II has vanished, you might see these, but for right now in our generations, they are not ever going to be put on display. I would posit that Adolf Hitler and the Nazis are probably the most infamous of all art thieves. They stole everything. When we look at the works that were created during this reign, Hitler very much was a classicist. His architect, Albert Speer, constructed buildings for the 1936 Olympic Games in Berlin, very much of the Greco-Roman style. But knowing what work he approved of, we also have to take into effect the work that he hated. And Hitler hated modern art. And that's very difficult for me to comprehend because I'm a modernist. This is my favorite period of time in art. And what he ended up doing is calling both artists and artworks degenerate. Degenerate means having lost the physical, mental, or moral qualities considered to be normal and desirable. That this modern art showed evidence of decline. And in the history of art, we do have ebbs and flows. We have a rise up to the classical age and then a fall into the dark ages or the middle ages. And we have another rise through the Renaissance. And again, Hitler was concerned that art was beginning to decline, that he didn't understand why people weren't seeing scenes as accurately as previous artists had created. He labeled works degenerate by the Impressionists, the Cubists, the Expressionists, Surrealists, and Dadaists. He hated these people the most. He called them, quote, insane and depraved humans. These are some of the most famous artists during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, including Camille Pissarro, Edward Munch, Kandinsky, and Modigliani, Chagall, and Braque, along with our friend Pablo Picasso, all labeled as degenerate artists. I usually show this work in my classes when we talk about printmaking. It's called Prophet. It's by the German expressionist artist Emil Nold. But what I don't uncover until I give them this lecture is that Emil Nold happened to be a member of the Nazi Party, in fact, a fervent member. And this definitely stains the interpretation of his work. However, he was still labeled as a degenerate artist because he was an expressionist. Others, such as Paul Klee, removed from his teaching post at the Bauhaus. The Bauhaus, of course, being Germany's most important art school. It was an art school unlike any other. Art all rested on one level. And normally we have kind of maybe a hierarchy of arts where we have painting and drawing, sculpture as the fine arts, and then we have more of the crafts like ceramics and glass and such. But at the Bauhaus, everything was at the same level. It was a school of art and design. When Hitler rose to power in 1933, this is the very first thing he did was close the Bauhaus. In fact, this grainy picture is of students being taken away from the Bauhaus as it became a German party headquarters during this reign. And I have a couple pictures of it afterwards as well, after the end of World War II. Fortunately, it has been rebuilt today, but it is a school of modern art. it was not one that was caught up with the classical teaching traditions. And so Hitler called this school, quote, un-German. These are the types of artworks that were being created. And out of this school also were led by some of the most famous modernist artists and teachers, people like Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, who was actually of Russian descent, famous for sculpture, photography, and graphic design. Joseph and Annie Albers, of course, Annie Albers is noted for textiles and such. Oskar Schlemmer, he was the director of the Bauhaus Theater, and we have, these wonderful costumes, and he was also a sculptor. Marcel Breuer, he's famous for giving us the steel-tubed chairs. And Nam Gabo, who is famous for these wonderful works of lucite and nylon. And Nam Gabo was one of the last individuals to leave the Bauhaus. In his diaries, he writes how he was literally leaving his studio doors, walking out as stormtroopers were coming in through other doors into his studio. And he ends up immigrating to, I believe it was France, and then finally to America. In 1937, Hitler is going to sign the Degenerate Art Act, which allows Nazi troops to go through Germany's state museums to cleanse them of works that are deemed poisonous. Museums, they didn't have a choice. They were forced to relinquish their collections. And within a matter of 2 weeks, the Nazis had gathered up 16,000 paintings that were considered degenerate. Works like this self-portrait by the artist Kirchner. Van Gogh's self-portrait here, which was sold at auction. All these paintings and artworks were taken to Switzerland and sold at auction. This one fetched like $50,000 for that time, which was a very good sum of money. This painting was also sold at that auction, purchased by Joseph Pulitzer Jr. After the war, he would go on to donate this work to the St. Louis Art Museum. He said he wanted to save this painting from an uncertain future, and I think that was really important because of the 16,000 works that were taken to this auction, 11,000 were sold, the other 5,000 were destroyed. And this is only step one in Hitler's plan. It's to rid the world of bad art. And very much like Napoleon's philosophy, it doesn't sound that bad, because I know I don't want to see bad art, but I also don't want this person to be the one to censor what's good and what's bad. The second step is just as nefarious. It's to collect Europe's finest art treasures. The Germans would begin looting art from German Jewish families. And then once Austria was annexed to Germany in 1938, they would start looting art from Austrian Jewish families. And that's how the Nazis got a hold of this work here. This is the portrait of Adela Bloch-Bauer, and it is by the artist Gustav Klimt. This is Austria's most famous artist, and definitely their most famous artwork. It's been nicknamed the Austrian Mona Lisa. The person in the painting, Adela Bloch-Bauer, commissioned Gustav Klimt to paint her portrait. It was done in 1909, and she is going to pass away in 1925. This artwork, along with 4 others also by Klimt, are going to pass to her husband, Ferdinand. In 1939, Ferdinand is going to leave Austria. He's going to live in exile for the rest of his life in Switzerland. He's never going to return to gain possession back of these paintings. After the war is over, these paintings are given to the Austrian National Gallery, where they had been on display since the late 1940s through the early 2000s. And this is because of Adela's will. She says, I want to leave these to Austria and have the people of Austria see them. In the early 2000s, the family, led by Adela Bloch-Bauer's niece, Maria Altmann, waged a lawsuit against the country of Austria, asking for these paintings back, arguing that had Adela lived and seen all the horrific instances of the war, she would have never given the paintings to Austria, and the family wants them back. In 2005, I was working at the LA County Museum of Art, and we had these artworks on display. They were touring the world, and honestly, I wish I had known the story back then, because I would have paid more attention to these artworks. We had a lot of rotating exhibitions. In fact, we had just finished the King Tut exhibit, and I couldn't understand what the big draw was for 5 paintings. We had a huge exhibit space for them. And I remember the day that it opened, I was going to walk down and walk through the exhibit. And then I realized that there was like the line out the door and wrapped around like the building twice. And it was like a 2-hour wait to get in. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to wait 2 hours to see these artworks. I'll go in on Wednesday, which is when the museum is closed to the public. And so I walked into this room, and there was this armed guard there, and he told me to get out, which I did because he had a gun. And at that point, I knew that these works were extremely important. So a couple weeks later, I did make it back into the exhibit and walked around, stood in front of this painting, just where Maria Altmann is here, and saw the other works. Maria Altmann's main argument was that these were her family's heritage, that every Sunday she would go to Aunt Adele's house, and this was at the end of the dining room table where they would have their brunch. In 2007, in a landmark court case, the family got these paintings returned to them. And I have a short video of what happened to these paintings. So let me play this for you real quick.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Christie's, and it's our privilege to have you here on what for us is a very special evening. And it's my real privilege to introduce to you a very special lady, and I choose my terms carefully, Maria Altmann, who is the niece of the late Ferdinand and Adela Bloch-Bauer. You wanted them to remain in public collection.
Exactly.
Why are you selling it to perhaps private collectors?
I'm not the only one. I have 4 co-heirs. And we would very much like to see the paintings for the rest of the time in public view. So our hope will be that there'll be museums that will acquire them.
Well, 51, the Klimt, birch trees, $28 million. Against you, madam, at 28, 29 million with Ken now. At 30 million, Yussi's bidder, at $32 million. 33 million at $36 million, all done and selling right at $36 million. Mark, your bidder at 36 million. 1728, thank you. Lot 52, second Klimt, the Attersee landscape there, lot 52, in this case, $10 million starts it. Still up front, against you here, and selling this time, all done at $28 million. For you, madam, $28 million. Third Klimt, apple tree number 1, showing on the screen again, far right, 1912, showing here, and as illustrated there in your catalogues. $24,500,000. 25 million. 25 million with Thomas now. 29,500,000, selling this side for 29,500,000. Lot 54, fourth Klimt there, portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer 2, showing again on the screen far right, and as illustrated in your catalogues, the 1912 portrait. And in this case, $25 million starts it at 25 million now. 57,500,000. Against Pedro, 58 million, $64,500,000. 65 million at $78,500,000 on this telephone. Fair warning. Guy, your bidder at $78 million, 500.
And I don't have the video for this painting here when it sold at auction, but it sold for $135 million, the most amount of money anyone had ever paid for a painting up to that time. Right now, it's not even on the top 10 list anymore. It's, I think, around 14th. But it was purchased by Ben Lauder, who is a member of the Estee Lauder family. And for a while, he had this in his living room. I saw interviews with him sitting down where this painting was behind the couch. The individuals who bought these paintings were unique. They were not really associated with any museums per se. And so these great artistic works were taken out of the public space and sold to individuals. The family in that auction gained about $300 million before commissions, of course. But I always ask my students at this point, was this the right thing for the family to do? Maria Altman, to me, argued that this was her family's heritage, yet the family decided at the end to sell the paintings. This work here that we just saw at the very end being sold for $78 million, it ended up being a phone bidder who was bidding for Oprah Winfrey. Several years later, Oprah is going to turn around and sell this painting for about double what she paid for it. So there are many, many celebrities, of course, that are going out and purchasing art. Including people like Vincent Price and Bruce Willis. Jack Nicholson has a very extensive art collection. In fact, Barbara Streisand, when I was working at the LA County Museum of Art, we actually held some of her paintings at the museum, and the only restrictions on us were that when she would throw a party at her mansion in Beverly Hills, we were to take the paintings and deliver them for her party, and then we would pick them up once the party was over and bring them back to the museum. So it was very mutually beneficial. But I want to return back to the war. After Austria falls to Germany, we lose Poland, the Ukraine, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Belgium, Luxembourg, Holland, and France. France being really having the largest art collection in Europe. And in 1939, museum administrators decide that it is time to evacuate the Louvre. And for the first time ever, these century-old paintings were taken off of the walls, and the Louvre ceases to become a museum, and it becomes this packing house where you have art being packed and transported in very chaotic conditions, and honestly in very unsafe conditions, seeing people walking out the doorway without any gloves on, handling these artworks, just worries me. These incredibly large paintings. This is a beautiful painting. It's called Maria de Medici Arriving at Marseille. And this is one of 27 paintings that she commissions from the artist Rubens to basically legitimize her ascent to the throne. She's from the Italian Medici family, and we can see that from the little coat of arms that's up here, the little signifying spheres on the shield. And she is married the French king, and he passes away, and she rises to the throne and reigns as regent. This painting you can see is absolutely gigantic. 6 people are loading it onto a truck, and these trucks would be taken out to hiding places in the French countryside. Even the great statue atop the staircase in the Louvre, the Victory of Samothrace, is taken down. And this is not one solid sculpture. It's not just missing its head. It is a sculpture that was constructed from several hundred pieces. And even the curator at the museum at the time was unsure as to whether or not it would hold together. But fortunately, it did. Now, the Mona Lisa, she gets special treatments, and she always gets special treatment. She escapes in her own climate-controlled ambulance to locations that we don't know where she was at. Between 1939 and the summer of 1945, we have no idea where she is at. There's no official documentation to this painting. But the Germans were smart, and they uncovered a lot of these hiding places. And when these hiding places or caches of artwork were discovered, they would be put on a train and taken to Berlin. The finest works by the most famous artists were offered to Hitler for his own private collection, and then to his first rung of generals such as Goering and Goebel. Art collecting made, actually, I'm not going to go there, but art collecting was definitely a passion for Hitler. And then works were set aside for Germany's state museums. Other works that were stolen was like Michelangelo's Madonna and Child. After France, it was Poland that had the largest collection of art in Europe. And this work by Da Vinci, called Lady with an Ermine, this is her name is Cecilia Gallerani, was taken to a country house and walled up with a lot of other gold artifacts in the basement of this home. The Germans saw the comings and goings of workmen. They broke into the home, tore down the newly constructed wall, hiding all these possessions. They took all the gold and they left the painting. When it was recovered, there was a boot print on its surface. Among the most important treasures still missing from the First World War is this work here. This is a self-portrait of Raphael, and there's only 3 self-portraits that Raphael ever completed during his lifetime. He's one of the great Renaissance artists, along with Michelangelo and Da Vinci. And this painting was last seen in 1945 in January of that year in the possession of the Nazi governor of Poland. It has not been seen since. In 2012, the art newspaper ran a story saying that we finally found it, that had been recovered, and it was in a bank vault at an undisclosed location. Unfortunately, a couple weeks later, this ended up being a hoax. So where was all of the art? One of the hiding places that the Germans took the art was up in the Bavarian Alps. This is the Castle Neuschwanstein, and you can see it was completely loaded with looted art. In fact, if you added up the amount of money that was stolen in art during World War II, it would amass to around $28 billion worth of art. Now, another hiding place was in mines, literally a mile down in the earth. In this salt mine in Austria was one of the largest caches of artwork. And this was also a location that was set up with bombs or explosives that would go off if they were ever tripped. So all of the explosives had to be removed first, and then when the mine was unloaded, it was 80 train loads worth of 80 train cars worth of art being removed from that. The individuals that you see in several of these pictures here, including particularly the bottom one, that is Dean Keller. He is one of the, in fact, he is the leader of the Monuments Men, which was charged with protecting art and preserving art during the Second World War. I'll show you a few pictures of the recovery here. Now, these panels, both in front of these soldiers and behind them, are significant because these are panels from the Ghent altarpiece. And the Ghent altarpiece is absolutely gigantic. It's about 15 feet wide, it's 11 and a half feet tall, and it weighs literally a ton. It is also remarkable because it is among the most frequently stolen works of art ever produced. It has been stolen. Now, it's only been around for 600 years. During that time, it's been stolen 13 times. The last time in 1937 by Hitler and the Nazis. However, in this painting here, the bottom left-hand segment, the bottom left-hand panel is a replica. That has not been recovered. We have no idea where it is, but it's an absolutely beautiful work. Unfortunately, as well, there are still 100,000 works of art still missing from the war. And these, through generational changes, more and more of these have ended up turning up. But also there are a tremendous amount in Russia as well who are holding the art. I want to talk about a few of the more famous art thieves. Thomas Bruce, for instance, is better known as Lord Elgin. He's like the 7th Lord Elgin, and he was the British ambassador to the Ottoman Empire. And in Greece in 1801, he obtains permission from the Ottoman authorities to purchase about half of the surviving sculptures that are left on the Parthenon. And of course, the Parthenon is this grand temple on top of the Acropolis in Greece. And where the sculptures would have been up in this pediment area here. So there's kind of this triangular area with the sloping sides, which is why the sculptures themselves have this diagonal effect to them. So they're taken up to the British Museum, where you would be able to see them today. The Ottoman Empire falls in Greece in like 1822, and Greece immediately asks for these to be returned, which the British Museum says no. In fact, even as late as 2013, when the Greeks open up the Acropolis Museum, they have space set aside for these artworks, and the British Museum still refuses to give them up. Now, if they had been returned earlier, most likely they would have been destroyed and we wouldn't even have them at all today. So usually when I teach my ancient civilizations classes, we argue whether or not these should be returned or whether they should stay in England. But the British Museum argues many times that if they begin to repatriate works, the museum's going to be nearly empty, such as these works of these brass plaques, which were stolen from the country of Nigeria way back in 1857 during the punitive expedition. 2,000 brass plaques were stolen from the royal residence, and 200 of them have made their way now to the British Museum. Adam Worth was the head of a criminal syndicate in London during the Victorian age. His brother John had been arrested, and so Adam decides that he needs a bargaining chip to get his brother out of jail. And what he does is he, along with 2 bodyguards, goes over to the Thomas Agnew and Sons auction house. The bodyguards lift Adam Worth up into this open window, and in the middle of the night, he finds this painting called The Duchess of Devonshire and cuts it from its frame. This is a painting by Gainsborough, and he rolls it up and he takes it home with him. They escape, and he basically places it like under his bed is where he kept it, he said. His brother got out of jail by totally legal means, and Adam Worth decides not to return the painting. He says he became entranced with her beauty. A painting by Gainsborough like this today is valued somewhere over $1 million. One of the more daring art thieves is Vincenzo Peruggia, who was a carpenter. And this gentleman spent a night in a utility closet in the Louvre. Went in the closet on a Sunday evening, and on Monday morning in August of 1911, he stepped out as the museum was opening, and he walked over to the wall and stole one of the most famous paintings of all time. He is the one who stole the Mona Lisa. Now, the Mona Lisa, in fact, today, we always think of it as such a worldly treasure. We go to the Louvre to see the Mona Lisa. She was not as famous as she was today back in 1911. And she was like just on the wall with these other paintings. And it took a while for the museum to even realize that she was gone. People would come in, where's the Mona Lisa? Well, it's over here on the wall. Oh, it's not there. It's probably downstairs being cleaned or photographed. It's very common for museums to move artwork from the exhibit galleries to do work with them. It was not until noon that they realized that the painting had been stolen. They contacted the police at that time, and it was 2 years before the painting was recovered. And there were all these theories that even someone, that it was a publicity stunt that Picasso pulled off. Vincenzo Peruggia, though, was caught selling the Mona Lisa to an undercover police officer. At his trial, he argues that he is an Italian expatriate, that he is just trying to return all the great works that Napoleon stole. However, Napoleon did not steal the Mona Lisa. And it was sold, and it's a very interesting story. The Mona Lisa is a painting that Da Vinci kept with him his entire life. And I don't know why. Normally, when you have a painting done during the Renaissance age, there is money paid for by the patron of the artwork, who happened to be a Florentine banker, to have Da Vinci paint this image of his wife. But Da Vinci never separated from this painting. It has been cut down in size. In 1514, he's going to sell it to the King of France, King Francis I. But then Da Vinci's going to go and live in the court of Francis I for the last 5 years of his life. Da Vinci dies in 1519, and he dies in France. He does not die in Italy. Among my favorite art thieves is Stefan Breitweiser. This guy is a waiter, and he begins stealing art in 1995. He's in his early 20s, and there was nothing that this guy didn't like. He was in Europe, and in Europe, they have a lot of country houses that are open and on display. He stole drawings, paintings, illuminated manuscripts. He stole sculptures, silverware, and ivory carvings. By the time he's caught, he has stolen 239 objects from 172 different venues. Why I like him so much is that at his trial, he says, quote, "It became a compulsion. I wanted more and more, and I couldn't stop myself. I needed these objects, and they needed me." The most expensive painting he stole was this one here. It's valued at $9 million. He stole it on his 24th birthday. Literally, his girlfriend calls him up in the morning. "What do you want to do today?" "I don't know. Let's steal this painting." And they do. The paintings were taken down the street from where he lived to a carpenter who made him new frames, because he would cut these from their original frames. And not once did the carpenter ever ask him where he was getting all these paintings from. He did live at home, and he would fill up his bedroom walls with these artworks. And after the bedroom walls were full, he would start having rotating exhibits. He did get caught. The police are on the way to the mother's house. The girlfriend calls the mom and says, Stefan has been arrested. The police are headed your way. And the mother does what any good mother would do to protect her son. She starts to destroy the evidence. By the time the police show up and stop her, she has destroyed 60 of the 239 artworks, including this painting here by Boucher, which he is caught shoving down the garbage disposal. He is convicted and serves a little bit over 2 years in jail. His mother and his girlfriend both receive 1.5 year sentences. He gets out and he writes this book, Confessions of an Art Thief, which has not been translated into English yet. But this guy is addicted to stealing. He has been caught a couple more times trying to sell art that has been stolen. And he has just gotten out of jail for the 3rd time. But this is also when we know exactly who the art thieves are. Many times we don't. In the spring of 2001, the Jewish Museum of New York had this painting stolen. And this is a study, it's a preliminary painting. But it's valued at $1 million. It's by the artist Chagall. A year later, it ends up being found in a postal sorting station in Topeka, Kansas. Edward Munch's famous painting, The Scream, is stolen in 1994. And this is stolen on the opening day of the Winter Olympics in Oslo. And so everyone's at the Olympics and no one's at the National Museum. And this painting is stolen. The thieves, they left a note thanking the museum for their poor security. It was recovered about 9 months later, no damage to it. However, a decade later, in 2004, this version of The Scream was stolen. There are 4 versions of this painting. And the thieves also stole Munch's version of the Madonna. And this is that image of the thieves escaping in their Audi station wagon. And the gentleman at the very far left there, he has the Madonna painting and he drops it twice on the way to the car. The security guards even said that these were the clumsiest thieves that they had ever seen. And being interviewed by the reporter asks the security guards, well, how did they get away with it then? And the security guard responded, well, you know, they had guns. So these paintings were also recovered 2 years later. Unfortunately, when we looked at the paintings, they've been damaged. Munch's Scream has irreparable water damage there to the lower left-hand side. And to the right side of the Madonna, there's some rips and tears and damage to that work. With this painting, the Madonna with the yarn winder, this is a painting that's attributed to Leonardo da Vinci, and it's valued at $65 million. It was just hanging in a castle in Drumlanrig, Scotland. And in 2003, there were 2 gentlemen who were taking the tour of the castle, and they grabbed the painting, and just like in a movie, they jumped out a window and ran across the castle grounds and disappeared. 4 years later, this ends up in a locker in a train station in Glasgow. But I guess it's good that those paintings were recovered because there's many that have not been. Matisse's Luxembourg Gardens, for instance, has been missing for 15 years now. One of my favorite artists, Jean-Laurent Gérôme, his Pool in the Harem painting, valued at $1 million, missing for nearly 20 years now. The Vanderbilt murals, they're valued at $2 million each. Andrew Wyeth's Moon Madness, valued at $3 million. Henry Moore's reclining figure, missing since December of 2005. This is an artwork that's valued at about $5.6 million. And I give the thieves props for this. They not only stole this sculpture, they stole the flatbed in order to steal this sculpture. And this is on the estate of Henry Moore himself. So on the artist's estate. Another beautiful painting, Audrey's White Duck, valued at $8 million. Caravaggio's Nativity Scene, valued at $20 million. Rembrandt, Storm on the Sea of Galilee. This is his only seascape, considered to be a priceless painting. Vermeer's The Concert. Vermeer is only an artist who completed about 36 or 37 paintings. Again, a priceless artwork. And also Edward Manet's Chez Tortoni, who, this is the father of modern art. This is also a priceless artwork. And you'll notice these last three paintings were all stolen on the same day. March 18th, 1990. This is when the largest art heist on American soil took place. And this was at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. Over $500 million worth of art was stolen from this museum. The thieves were dressed as police officers. They knocked on the door of the museum in the middle of the night, and the night security let them in. The night security was then handcuffed to pipes in the basement. And for 89 minutes, the thieves had their run of the museum, and they stole 13 works of art. And it, to me, is very unique that they spent 89 minutes there, because that is not an art theft. An art theft happens very, very quickly. It's usually a smash and grab. They want to get out of there as soon as possible. When you look at 89 minutes, that is a shopping spree. It is not a theft. But they stole 13 works, again, valued at about $500 million. All of the artworks are still missing. None of them have been recovered. The FBI several times has said we're close to finding these paintings, yet they're still offering a reward and still looking for these works. There are a couple great books on the Gardner heist itself. The book at the left, in fact, is a fantastic book with a chapter devoted to each of the missing artworks. We also have books like Museum of the Missing and Loot. Loot is written by a famous newspaper reporter, wrote a lot for the New Yorker, and Sharon Waxman really focuses on the ancient antiquities because there are a lot of issues in that field today with where they belong and where they should truly be. The Rape of Europa, the book itself, came out in the early 90s, around 1993, won all sorts of book awards, followed up by the movie, the documentary in 2007. It does focus on not only art theft, but also it's a really decent documentary of World War II. We also have some Hollywood productions of these types of issues in The Monuments Men. While I tell you it's not 100% authentic, I still think it's a good enough watch, and definitely relates to a lot of the stolen artworks of the age. The same can be said for The Woman in Gold. It's a fantastic film starring Helen Mirren as the niece of Adela Bloch-Bauer, and tells the horrific times of what it was like in Nazi-occupied Austria in the late 1930s and early 1940s. So again, it is a Hollywood production. It's not 100% accurate, but it is a very, very a good movie to watch, and most of it is very accurate. There's also podcasts such as the Last Scene podcast, which focuses on the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum art theft. And that is actually where I'd like to leave it for today. I am available for some questions, Janice, if you or anyone else has them. And I'm going to stop sharing here.
Thank you so much, Dave. That was just fascinating. I felt like I was listening to an adventure movie, which was unfortunately too true. Before our audience goes, I'd like to remind you about our Eclectics Diversity program, March 17th, with Brady Heiner, who's Associate Professor and Director of Project Rebound. That's on Wednesday. Then in 2 weeks, for Eclectics, our Eclectics 1, we have, oh, this is a long title, Emerging Non-Destructive Testing and Eco-Friendly Materials, on March 23rd. So thank you very much for attending today, and we look forward to seeing you in future.